Okay, like any German in the 1930s knows full well, the Führer is focused on the betterment of the German race with little time for frivolity, luxury, and comfort. He is a modest and sober-living leader. Any money the Nazi party gets goes right back into the movement, for the cause, you know. Okay, that's not at all how it was. The reality is that the party has wealthy, aristocratic, and capitalist benefactors from the start, and Hitler himself enjoys an upper-class lifestyle, living large in several homes with banquets, fancy hotels, and chauffeur-driven Mercedes. I'm Spartacus Olsson. This is a World War II in real-time special about Adolf Hitler's homes and finances. Now, you might be wondering why I'm sitting in the Between Two Wars set. Well, there are two reasons for that. First of all, this episode largely takes part in the era between 1919 and 1939, between the wars. And second of all, it's Corona times, so Indy, Astrid, and I are alone shooting all of this, and changing sets takes a little bit too much time. And right now we're shooting the second season of Between Two Wars, which you can check out with a link in the description. Hitler will one day be a Crassus of Germany, but everything has its modest beginnings. In the early days of the 1920s, money is scarce for the Nazis and their emerging leader. But Hitler is a very talented networker, and soon a growing inner circle of well-connected patrons forms. It's in part flamboyant characters like the wealthy playboy Kurt Lüdecke and high society roller Ernst Putzi Hafenstangl, but also includes members of the Bavarian upper middle class, aristocracy, and industrial magnates like Fritz Thyssen, Ernst von Borsig, and right-wing foreign admirers in Switzerland, France, and other places. Most of that funding goes into the party's coffers, though, and Hitler hopes that personally, he will strike gold for himself with Mein Kampf. But in 1925, the first edition only sells 9,473 copies, with Hitler receiving 10% of the revenue. He declares to have made 19,843 Reichsmark for that year, although the same year he acquires a supercharged Mercedes, which at 20,000 Reichsmark is more than he has earned before taxes. Hitler's confidant Otto Dietrich later will say this about that. He considered the Mercedes the foremost German quality automobile. Moreover, at the beginning of his political career, the firm had obligingly permitted him to acquire his first automobile by installment payments. And perhaps he's living by the adage that one rather cries in a Mercedes-Benz than on a bus, because financially speaking, as the 20s proceed, there isn't that much to laugh about for Herr Hitler. Yes, at this point, his political rise also seems less than a happy matter. His doomsday apocalyptic populism doesn't gain as much traction as he'd like during the German Golden 20s. Mein Kampf sales continue to dwindle, with 6,607 sold in 1927. The audiences for his speaking performances decrease as well. This is reflected in the tax filing of 11,494 for 1927 and a similar amount in 1928. Party membership stagnates as well. Aside from some ever-loyal patrons, income seems to dry up. Some industrial investors are hesitant to give their unconditional support to the Nazis. It's easy to understand why. Until 1927, the Nazi ideology is still heavily influenced by the more economically left-leaning Nazis Otto and Gregor Strasser, generally seen as anti-business by the business community. Hitler defeats the Strasser ideology and changes the direction of the party in 1927, but there has always been an undercurrent of socialist-sounding rhetoric, as evident by the party's and movement's name, National Socialism. Hitler wants to abandon any such rhetoric, but he's reminded by his propaganda expert Joseph Goebbels, himself a convert from Strasserism to Hitlerism, that the reason behind the rhetoric in the first place is that it is how they have created a solid base of violent, working-class supporters by siphoning off left-leaning nationalists from the radical left. Goebbels fundamentally reverses the rhetoric so that it becomes nothing but newspeak, where anti-Semitic ideas are conflated with socialist-sounding rhetoric. capitalist now becomes Jew, the international banking system is now the imagined global Jewish conspiracy, and so on. Hitler is meanwhile working behind the scenes to convince the actual capitalists and bankers that he and the Nazis are their friends. But with Goebbels' continued confusing language and lingering suspicions created by the Strasserites, Hitler faces an uphill battle. Publicly, he also promotes his own humble taste for food and clothing and repeatedly tells his audiences at speeches that he doesn't receive any salary from the NSDAP or any compensation for his speeches. But there's something fishy going on here. Behind the scenes, Hitler is already living a fairly luxurious life. In 1929, he rents a sprawling apartment in Munich at the upscale address Prinzregentenplatz 16, complete with housekeeper, manservant, and cook. In the summers, he rents a villa, Haus Wachenfeld in Obersalzberg in the Bavarian Alps. In 1930, he buys yet another supercharged Mercedes. He attends soirees, private dinners, and public events that are a staple of social life in Munich's high society. But he still only declares an income of 15,448 Reichsmark in 1929. The fact is that in 2021, we still don't know exactly how Hitler finances his lifestyle, especially before 1933. He's notoriously secretive about it, and there are no other records beyond his tax returns that we know of. Even Franz Xaver Schwarz, the treasurer of the NSDAP, doesn't have any access to Hitler's private businesses. We do know that he had a bunch of loyal admirers, quite a few of them women, like Helene Bechstein, Elsa Bruckmann, and Gertrud von Seidlitz, all very well off, and we have anecdotal evidence that he did rake in personal donations on the side of his fundraising for the NSDAP from day one. But actual evidence of the details is lacking. By 1930, though, as his political popularity increases, so does his finances. In that year, Hitler's taxable income is 45,472 Reichsmark. Mein Kampf sales increase and revenue from its publisher, EF Verlag, which becomes a hugely lucrative venture for both the Nazis and Hitler personally, starts to take off. By 1930, Hitler's speaking gigs also increase. So does the paying audiences. Here again, we have little evidence, but it's likely that he receives a percentage of the box office. In the first years of the 30s, his declared income continues to rise, but it still doesn't amount to enough money to pay for his evident expenditure. Not only are we historians unable to understand, so are the German tax authorities at the time, who simply don't buy it, and based on what they can clearly see just by reading the news, estimate his income and slap him with tax arrears well above what he is earning. Hitler just refuses to pay and continues to rack up a tax debt. But even more golden days lay in store for Adolf once he assumes the role as Germany's chancellor in 1933. That year, a whopping 854,127 copies of Mein Kampf are sold. It helps considerably that under Hitler's new German government, every newlywed couple is gifted an edition of Mein Kampf by the local municipality. They in turn, of course, have to buy it, with parts of the proceeds going to Hitler personally, who also by now controls publishing and distribution. By 1945, Mein Kampf will have been sold just shy of 10 million times. In 1933, he reports an income of 1,232,355 Reichsmark. He still owes the German state hundreds of thousands of Reichsmark in taxes, though. But now his cronies are running the tax department, and it doesn't take long before the debt is forgiven and Adolf Hitler is officially tax exempt. The involvement of German industry in the funding of the Nazi Party and Hitler himself has by now increased manyfold. It starts shortly before they seize power and is largely the work of one man, Hjalmar Schacht. He intercedes with German capitalists on Hitler's behalf and cements credibility for Hitler's anti-socialist stance that he's been trying to sell. Schacht introduces Hitler to the top echelons of German business and finance, and together they forge an alliance between the Nazis and the German industry, banking, and service sectors. We've covered this in detail in our Between Two Wars series. There will be a link at the end of the video and in the description. In any case, beyond supporting the party financially, a collective of industrial and business leaders pledges 3 million Reichsmark directly to the Führer in early 1933. It is the beginning of what will become the Adolf-Hitler-Spende, Hitler's own private trust fund, championed by Gustav Krupp of Krupp Steel, saying that the fund is there to represent a token of gratitude to the leader of the nation. The Adolf-Hitler-Spende will grow to become the primary source of Hitler's personal wealth, leaving even Mein Kampf in the dust. But Hitler wants more. Now, if you know anything about Nazi propaganda and the public material of the Nazi Reich, you'll know that it features Hitler's likeness quite liberally. Now, that's not just a way to create the cult of personality for the Führer, it's a business venture. Hitler actually charges licensing fees to the German state for the use of his image, even when used on stamps and propaganda posters. But as Hitler strikes gold, he's clever enough to create a trickle-down system of corruption for his inner circle and key supporters to profit with him. As we've explained in our special on the system of Nazi government, he becomes the embodiment of the destiny of the German people, justifying any expenses made in favor of his person. He uses this untouchable status to use the German state to award friends and financial backers with lucrative contracts and government jobs. Those who remain loyal to Hitler are rewarded with power and riches, and there is enough to go around. The NSDAP leadership now use their influence to construct palaces and private vanity projects such as museums and statues. And in contrast to the actual socialists in, for instance, the Soviet Union, the Nazis make sure to not destroy the system of capital finance and private venture. Instead, they take them in on the scam. The owners of big business profit from Hitler and Schacht's abolition of all antitrust laws and most state regulation of the economy, as well as tax policies that favors big business and capital owners. But it is a scam. Because like any economy, Germany is not made of endless money. Someone has to pay for all of this. And that is the German people, who never see their salary share of GDP grow significantly during the Nazi years, and who, unknown to themselves, are being burdened by a rampant increase in national debt, are having their national industry sold off to private interests at rebates, and are even directly scammed out of their savings by projects like the MEFO bills, a Ponzi scheme set up to circumvent arms production financing limitations from the Versailles Treaty. Last but not least, the money flows in from the expropriation of anyone deemed to be undesirable by the Nazis. Jews, ethnic victims, political dissidents, and social undesirables see their property vanish into the pockets of the Nazi leaders. When that isn't enough, they often simply steal and extort what they want from Aryan Germans. We'll get to their projects in the resort of Berchtesgaden in a moment, but there, for instance, when some landowners refuse to sell to any of the Nazi leaders looking to get in, the owners are simply put in concentration camp until they change their mind. When the war breaks out, it is all of Europe that will now contribute to Hitler and the other Nazis' riches, as we have seen in our video about their art and valuables looting scheme. That Hitler benefits from it all is clear by just the simplest observation. He's now living like a king in an absolute monarchy. He owns 6 or 7 supercharged Mercedes limousines, a private train with 11 coaches, and 3 airplanes. He's advancing with the Führer Museum in Linz in Austria, where he plans to show off the most extensive and most valuable private art collection anyone has ever seen. Again, covered in our video about Nazi looting. And he has a real estate portfolio that expands and improves throughout his rule. First of all, though it's not technically his, he has access to the luxurious old chancellery in Berlin, which he has remodeled to fit his personal needs. But he has immediate ownership as well. After renting the luxurious 9-room apartment on Prinzregentenplatz in Munich for almost 10 years, he buys it in 1938 for 175,000 Reichsmark, most likely directly with money from the Adolf-Hitler-Spende. And he also has several other apartments in Munich that he puts at the disposal of his closest and dearest, among others his girlfriend, Eva Braun. But Hitler's most valuable private real estate begins construction in 1935, or rather reconstruction. Remember the residence in Obersalzberg in the Berchtesgaden Valley, Haus Wachenfeld, which Hitler would rent to spend his summers in the Bavarian Alps? He buys the house and starts remodeling it in 1933 to accommodate some guests. It still more or less fits the modesty of a writer and self-made politician. But then in 1935 he goes all out. Haus Wachenfeld turns it into the Berghof, a gigantic estate with a great many rooms, decorated with the most delicate art and made to accommodate the crème de la crème of the Nazi scene. In 1936, a complex of SS barracks, kitchens, staff quarters, a farm, and a communication center are added. It includes cinemas, pools, libraries, and sports facilities. A small building is added way above the Berghof, the Kehlsteinhaus, or Eagle's Nest, where a tunneled gilded lift takes visitors to the stunning summit of a 1,837-meter high mountain. Its addition alone cost 30 million Reichsmark. Most of Hitler's buildings in Berchtesgaden are gone in 2021, but you can still visit the Eagle's Nest. It's a rather Spartan cafe on a hiking path nowadays, but the building and elevator is still there and the view is quite stunning. In any case, in total, the Berghof complex's construction, which continues all the way into 1944, is believed to cost over 100 million Reichsmark, though some estimates come closer to 150 million Reichsmark. Again, most of the funding comes from contributions of wealthy industrialists through the Adolf-Hitler-Spende. It also doesn't take long for the rest of the Nazi leadership to start their vanity projects in Berchtesgaden with villas, country houses, and ranches for Göring, Himmler, Bormann, Goebbels, and the others, soon dotting the mountainside of the otherwise quiet valley of the mountain resort. From the moment Hitler gains some popularity, he seeks ways to live the most comfortable life possible while deceiving the public with a facade of a modest lifestyle. When he rises to power in 1933, his private projects shoot from the ground like toadstools. They are paid for by his book sales, by the state's finances, and by private donations from big business. Because of the secretive nature of his finances, especially during the 1920s and early 1930s, it's hard to put an exact number on Hitler's personal worth. That his persona conflates with the German state from 1933 onwards makes that even more difficult. Estimates range well into the hundreds of millions of Reichsmark, but it might be even more than that. A fortune built by corruption, fraud, theft, expropriation, wars of aggression, plunder, and mass murder. Hitler's understanding, or rather lack of understanding, of macroeconomics is also quite interesting, to say the least. You can watch our Between Two Wars episode on that right here. Unlike Hitler, we here at Time Ghost don't have access to an entire national economy, so make sure that we can continue putting out these little gems of knowledge to the world and join the Time Ghost army over at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Like, subscribe, ring that bell. Never forget.